So, the video I uploaded recently is called The Sacred Duty of Sharlayan. So it literally went over the discussion of the Sharlayan's great work, their secret plan, their sacred duty, aka. Going over that 270 years of what exactly it meant to them, what it meant to everybody else, and what the result of it overall was. A lot of people have the opinion that Sharlayan was right in what they did. And a lot of people have the opinion that Sharlayan was wrong about what they did. And there's an argument to be made for both sides, to be honest, because at the one side, Sharlayan did nothing but annoy us before we learned about this sacred duty. Like, we were going to them, why are you being so stubborn? Why are you hiding this information? We're literally fighting for the fate of the planet. And we're going to lock ourselves on our island. We don't give a damn about anybody else. And then when we finally found out, it gave them some vindication, but not much. In my opinion, they've changed for the better. But at the same time, not much about Sharlayan has changed after Endwalker. Because the only thing that's changed is their sacred duty is now done. They no longer have the enchantment over the forum members. So they can actually talk about what they did. But at the same time, they're a public body that they answer to the public themselves, because they technically are the public. There are 100 elected members from the public. So it makes you think that not a lot of these people would actually last in their own office. They're probably going to get booted out, essentially, just going, you lied to us. Like, they would have went home that evening after just telling the truth, and just like their families just going, you lied to us. How could you do this to us? You lied to our children. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I couldn't even say that if I wanted to. It's like, I want to tell you about a great... Like, I love that scene. That was probably one of my favorite scenes, when he's like, mind your tongue, Sharlayan. If you'd seen that... And his voice just disappears. But it also makes you think. Like, one of the things when I was researching the whole topic, one of the things I was thinking about was, okay, they didn't technically lie about anything because they couldn't actually say anything, but they elected to take this decision, to take the enchantment, to say, we're not allowed to do anything, the fate of the planet is at stake. Okay, granted. But in the end, they did lie about it. But it makes you wonder, what else haven't they told us? Is there anything else that we should know that they're not telling us? Is this the only enchantment? Is it possible that this enchantment that they dispelled was only for that subject? Is there other subjects that they can't tell us about? Do they have information about Mericidia? Do they have information about the New World? What is the truth behind Nuncraft's hope and them travelling to Sharlayan in the first place? There's so many subjects that they're like any governmental body. They don't tell you everything, because the citizens don't really need to know everything. Well, debatable subject, but either way. I'm ranting a bit here, so I'll stop that. Yeah, so it literally goes over their entire timeline, from the point where they heard the message in the Anti-Tower, all the way to the point of them telling everybody else 270 years later. Which, okay, that's a long time. I always found this tower, though, very interesting. I remember the first time I saw it and I was like, okay, that is probably one of the most unique things I've seen in this game to date. It's an upside down castle, essentially. And everything inside it plays out like an upside down castle as well. Like, I remember when you're walking through it, like when I was walking through it taking footage, and you're walking along the ceiling, which is now the floor, and then you look up, there's actually desks on the ceiling with books. And the books are all lying on the desk, so physics works very strange inside that tower. So I have a feeling people walked along the floor, and people walked on the top as well. So people were walking along the actual floor, and people were walking along the ceiling. Unless that's not how it's supposed to work. Maybe the enchantments faded over the years, I don't know. But yeah, the tower is probably one of the most fascinating things about the entire thing. Like, to make a castle literally upside down in order to get to this point here and then enter it. So essentially, this is a doorway, essentially. It goes in, and then you enter here. And I think it extends actually beyond what we actually see. So we enter the door, and then we proceed down a flight of stairs, and then we enter another portal. But I think that's the first part of the dungeon, and then the second part of the dungeon is actually inside. So that's where we actually hear from Hydaelyn and everything else. Because you'll notice that it's all indoors. We don't actually see outside the structure when we're inside. So we're deep under there, I think. But we don't see anything outside, unfortunately. But that allowed them to contact Hydaelyn. But it's not that far down, because the sunlight is there. And the cave system is just above us. And it's down here as well. So you have an underground reservoir. All the water is leading down to this point. This is not very deep. It's not very far down. Like, it's the bottom of the subterranean. That's it. But I think that's probably the unique thing about the Hinterlands, is that they had a readily accessible location where the plane of the ethereal sea and the actual our plane of existence are very close together at this particular point. It's probably because of the elevation or how close to sea level the Hinterlands is, possibly. And then you have Hydaelyn herself going through her entire speech, telling us everything, anything and everything we needed to know. You have the forum opening up their dialogue. Everybody's just like, okay, we're listening carefully. We're scholars just like you. Like, literally everybody here is a scholar. They're all learned individuals. They all know the score. They're just like, all right, you're telling us the truth now. We want to know. But yeah, it was an interesting video to make, because the entire subject of Sharlayan both intrigued me and annoyed me at the same time when I was playing Endwalker. So exploring it in more detail was something I enjoyed to do. I still remember this, and when I was going back, when I was doing my research, I see this scene totally different now. So when you're looking at this scene, I can remember how angry I was at this scene. When Forsino finally shows up, and he's like, Sharlayan we have no interest in getting involved in this, essentially. And I'm like, why the hell not? And we're all like, you can't just sit on the sidelines. The final days are coming. He's like, the final days? Nah. If there was going to be a final days, we'd know all about it. And then when you're looking at the scene, knowing everything about Endwalker, it hits totally different. You're just like, now I understand why he was being so coy, so cryptic, and not saying everything, because he literally couldn't. He said the maximum he was able to say. That's why he walked away from the seats here. He's just like, she's like, wait, don't go. Can you just come back and talk to us? And he's like, on this subject, I can't say anything, even if I wanted to. So that's why he continued walking away. And that's why he got so pissed at them as well. He's just like, you're pushing the subject, and I also want to protect you from this, so I'm just going to forbid you from using my name. You'll live, though. You'll survive. And then he walks away. But the scene hits totally different now. If you haven't watched the entire scene, I recommend going back and watching it again, because it hits very differently. Sharlayan will under no circumstances intervene in the conflicts between Eorzea and the Gallian Empire. At the same time, there is an argument to whether or not Sharlayan is still the same old Sharlayan, or now renewed, because they don't have this duty holding them back, or weighing on their shoulders, as it were. I still dislike this scene because Forsino's main strategy to get Alfie and Ali onto a ship was Japan shame culture. I've never heard that term before, Japan shame culture. Although, now that you're mentioning it, I think I've seen it in movies before. I think he did want them to just like, come with me, you'll be safe. But at the same time, I agree with you, because he had to do it in a way of saying, I can't tell you why I want you to abandon this fruitless endeavor. I already know there's a plan in motion, I just can't tell you. So just trust me. If he's turned around and just said, I want you to trust me as your father. Come with me. And the answers will follow. That's all you probably need to say. They wouldn't have done it, but he could have tried that. Although he did try other methods to get them to essentially just quit what they were doing. But the fact that they were trying to drag Sharlayan into the war was something he wasn't going to stand for either. So that's why his anger levels went up. I feel like his plan was to make them want to be obedient, to be brought back into the family. And then he was keeping them at arm's length for the rest of Endwalker because he was just protecting them. Like, when you see him break down then after everybody shows up to help Sharlayan, he realizes he was wrong. If he had involved everybody, they would have been ready to go ages ago. I mean, yeah, sure, Hydaelyn told Sharlayan the entire plan, just saying that there's a final day is coming. If Sharlayan had written an entire report on that and then went to the world and just said, we received a message from Hydaelyn, the final day is going to come one day, a lot of people would have probably believed them. It's not like there's some crackpot with a sign just going, the end is nigh. This is Sharlayan, for crying out loud. Everybody liked Sharlayan, and everybody listened to them. To be honest, it feels more like he knew his incredibly curious kids would investigate his very suspicious behavior and was trying to bait them back to Sharlayan and then lock them up. Exactly. And then lock them up. It would have done the duty of protecting Sharlayan's secret and also protecting his children by taking them back there and locking them away in Labyrinthos with everything else. I still don't... Well, I do understand. I've watched Doctor Who. I know how it works. Kind of. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. But the fact that this ship exists in two places at the same time, because of Dynamis. Because of Dynamis. It exists in both places because of Dynamis. Is, okay, it's as good as an excuse as any. It's a funny excuse. Like, they could have made any excuse, but they decided to make a Doctor Who reference with the wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. So, I approve of that. I mean, if Dynamis can erase souls and turn people into monsters stronger than ancients, I'll believe it. It seems to be capable of anything right now. It is both interesting to people, but at the same time, people are annoyed by it. Because Dynamis seems to be this catch-all of... Excuse me? It seems to be this catch-all of, like, anything peculiar, we just explain it away as Dynamis, because Dynamis is apparently this thing now. We only realize it exists now, but it seems to be capable of almost anything. And we have seen its capabilities in Ultima Thule, for example. It literally, well, as far as we're aware, it created that planet of Elysian. Or if somebody else had a hand behind it. I have a feeling there's a hand behind it. My excuse for that would be, it's dependent on the emotions of individuals in order to shape Dynamis, essentially. I don't know what sort of emotional shape of Dynamis shaped this, but okay. Could have been us. But yeah, Dynamis is a very... It's still today a controversial topic, because it seems to be just like the MacGuffin they pull out of the pocket just to go, this is your excuse. I'm just like, yeah, sure, but you can't just pull Dynamis out as the MacGuffin excuse every time you want to use it. It can only bring you so far. It's a fundamental force of the universe in FF14, along with Aether, but you can't keep using it all the time. It's gonna get stale if you keep using it. Levier plus Scion family dinner scene. I want that. Imagine that at the end of Endwalker, we get a dinner scene at the Levier estate, a big giant dining table with everybody there, like all the main figures of Endwalker around this giant table. So you have 4 members, you have all of us Scions, maybe the leadership of the Urizen Alliance. I'd love that. If we got a dinner scene like that, I would be very happy. And I'd be like, bring on 7.0 now. I am content. So I will answer some of the comments, because I've intentionally left them so I can answer them now. So, they became Warriors of Light in a different way. They carried this mission on in secret to save as many people, fauna, and artifacts, etc., and set up on the moon. Hydaelyn seems to have had a role to play in the planning. She made 2 plans, one encouraging a direct attack and an escape plan. This was a good tactic on her part. In the end, it took both halves of this plan to get the final battle site. That is very true. So, I said that in the video as well. The fact that Hydaelyn set up this entire plan with Sharlayan resulted in the construction of the Ragnarok. Like, without that ship, even if Hydaelyn gave us the location, we didn't have the ability to get there. Because we needed to transport ourselves and the other Scions to the end of the universe, literally. Now, we know Xenos did it. Xenos did fly to the end of the universe because he gorged himself on the rest of the Mother Crystal. It is conceivable that if we didn't have the Ragnarok, we could have summoned a different primal and ridden that to the end of the universe, but as far as I'm aware, there is a vacuum in the space of FF14. I don't think you can just fly through it like that. There's no air, for example, as far as we're aware. Like, they haven't really gone into detail about what space is in FF14. But yeah, they make a very good point that they were on a different path than ours. Like, in the end, they were working towards the salvation of Etheyris, the same way we were working for the salvation of Etheyris. So it was Hydaelyn playing the long game, essentially. She informed them because, do you know what, they're contacting me. I'm going to just give them a bit of information. They're pretty smart. It looks like they can do a bit. And in the end result of their plans did help us with the Ragnarok. And as I explained as well, their hoarding of knowledge preserved much of it for future generations, because a lot of that information, for example, could have been destroyed in the Calamity. It could have been lost in wars and conflicts. Like, there's multiple wars and conflicts that happens. The fall of Alamigo is a prime example. Garlemald burning a wrath of terror across continents, another. They didn't tend to destroy knowledge, they did tend to collect it, but it prevented a lot of that knowledge falling into Garlean hands as well, which is good. So that's a very good one. No amount of context justifies their actions, regardless of whatever consequences stem from being completely transparent. If you mean the lack of actions or initiative, it might seem strange at first. However, Sharlayan is applied to hold some very dark and destructive spells that they do not think should be released even during Endwalker, as it would only hasten their doom. That's a very good point. That is part of the knowledge that Sharlayan does hold. Like, for example, when I did my video about Nuncraft's Hope, the ship that saved a bunch of people during the Calamity, Nuncraft apparently channeled and used a powerful spell that transported that ship and everybody on it out of the ocean beyond Alabasta's Spine in northern Eorzea into the mountains of Garabania. That's a hell of a spell. Like, to be able to transport a ship and all of its inhabitants halfway across a continent, essentially. That is a hell of a feat. Like, whatever spell used, I'm still curious about what that spell was. And I actually made a video disputing whether or not Nuncraft was actually an Ascian, because that spell would have required some hell of knowledge to pull off, and a lot of power as well. More than one person would possess. I mean, throwing herself into the rift along with Thancred nearly ended Y'shtola. I'm assuming that spell would have worked on the same principle. And then you have the spell that teleported the Isle of Val as well. I'm thinking that's the same spell, because the Isle of Val disappeared and then ended up somewhere else. But we do know that the Sharlayans locked a lot of stuff away, a lot of powerful weapons, and Eureka is a prime example of them locking stuff away that even the Ascians wanted to get their hands on. It's kind of like a giant. It's kind of like a gentle giant with a nuclear arsenal. Paranoia and effective silencing restraints on esoteric information. Okay, that's a handful. Let me read that again. It's kind of like a gentle giant with a nuke arsenal, paranoia, and effective silencing restraints on esoteric information. I'm having a hard time processing that, to be perfectly honest. That's going way over my head. But it's just... It's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like a toddler with a nuclear button, is what I think you're trying to say. Just doing what Hydaelyn instructed was the safe option, though it would have been nice for them to actually cooperate with the Scions sooner, alas the plot needed to be stretched. That's a good point as well. The fact that news of the final days was already coming, people were starting to know even the term final days. That should have set off alarm bells in Sharlayan to say, okay, people are starting to cop on. The final days is actually coming. And we know there's one person among the Scions who Hydaelyn has been actively communicating with, aka us. That should have been enough of a signal for First Note to go back to Sharlayan. Alright, they know about the final days, we need to make a decision. And I'm assuming that's what they did. They made a decision and just go, we're not telling anybody. Hydaelyn gave us this duty. Who cares about anybody else? And they decided not to lift the enchantment and everything just went on as it did in Endwalker. It would have been a lot better had they just come out sooner and told us. It would have made things a lot easier, but as they say, the plot needed to be stretched out, so that was the story that was being told. Bad Sharlayan, essentially. So both of those comments are good. I like those. Thank you for the video. You're very welcome. Yeah, the one thing that was mentioned to me last week, or in another video rather, is the final cutscene that we saw with Golbez on the moon of the 13th. And there was something apparently I missed, so I want to actually look at that cutscene again. Because when they did the zoom out and the fade away of the fog to find out that his base of operations is on the moon, and that's where he's keeping Azdiah as well, in the crater where Zodiark's piece should have been kept. But there's no Zodiark piece there anymore as far as we're aware, unless Golbez has done something with it, which is highly likely. But people were stating, because there was no swords around the seal, that he actually did repurpose the swords, which I didn't notice. So I think it's probably one of the last cutscenes, was it? Or maybe I've gone too far. Meanwhile, on the moon of the 13th. Right, so somebody was saying that he had the sides of his domain decorated with the sword brands that Hydaelyn used to seal Zodiark away. This was something I didn't notice. So we have Azdiah. Poor girl, she's suffering like hell. We're gonna get you soon, don't worry. If she dies, I'm gonna freak. Sorry, girl. We'll get you out. Is that the... Oh, that is them! That's the swords! They're broken. But he had the... how am I didn't notice that until now? So that is the swords. How did I not notice that? I must be stupid. Wow. So there they are, look. Sword. 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 Broken swords, yeah, but...
At long
and they're
last.
kind of like a
The
weird
end
color.
draws nigh.
How did I miss that? Interesting. Azem probably had some very inspired concepts, considering all the cultures they have seen. That's true as well. Like, they could have invented a number of different things. New weapons, new weapon styles, new arts. Like, we know a lot of the arts that did exist, well, that exist today did exist back in Elvis, because we saw them utilizing it. But he could have created job arts himself as well. Alternatively, their travel stories and souvenirs would inspire more gifted creators. I'm assuming Vana would have inspired him as well. Like, she was an inspiration to a lot of people back in the day. So I'd say she would have inspired Azem as well. Maybe by that time they had become patented concepts, since Elpis was a testing site. That's a good point as well. They could have been tested, verified, and then released out for everybody to use. So they wouldn't need to be on a Elpis anymore, except to act as examples of current creatures on Etheyris that needed to interact with the test specimens. Other than test specimens interacting with test specimens, because you can't just have test specimens interacting with test specimens. You don't get a good result. You need to have them interacting with other creatures that are wandering around Etheyris, for example. From my part, Azem's conversations includes Vana and anyone holding that seat. And we don't even know if it's the both of them either. Like, there was probably a number of people occupying that seat before Vana got to it, and then she passed it on to Azem. And we know Vana was old enough. They, as far as we're aware, they don't really age that much. But yeah, the ancients and the people who occupy the convocation seats are a strange bunch. I have a number of theories about them, particularly about La Habrea, but I'll probably get into that in my next video. How well do you feel about the current story direction, specifically 6.1 and onwards? Well, the story was a bit jarring at the beginning, because I was used to the formula of you do an expansion and then you spend 3 patches filling out the rest of the storyline, tying any loose ends, and then you set up for the next expansion. That's the formula. Or that was the formula until Endwalker launched, because Endwalker's entire story tied up the rest of the story of the entire game. And then we spent 6.1 onwards setting up some new tale, essentially. Newfound adventure, essentially. I have already given my opinion on Newfound Adventure, but my general opinion is, just to reiterate it, is Newfound Adventure, for me, lacked the adventure. Like, I remember when they announced Newfound Adventure, people are like, oh my god, we're freed from all this end of the world stuff. We're not going to be jumping around fighting fires. We're going out on an adventure for the sake of adventure. Everybody was so excited. That lasted all of like 5 minutes. We went out on a new adventure. Tataru told us to go to Razatan. We ended up getting tied into a new journey to the bottom of the ocean with Estinian, and that set up the entire Void storyline. So we literally went back to defending the fate of a world, not Etheyris' world, but that's about to be what's going to happen, I think. But we instantly jumped back into where we were. I wanted to just go on an adventure. I wanted to spend those patches running around on an adventure. Just a new adventure for the sake of adventure. I wanted to feel like I was level 15 again. Running around in even a new area or a familiar area doing quests. That's what I wanted, but it didn't turn out like that. So, in my opinion, 6.1 and Newfound Adventure lacked the adventure part. We got a new adventure, granted, but it wasn't the one that people expected, nor the one we desired. People were fatigued, in my opinion. I was fatigued. Like, we literally just saved the universe. And then we're jumping right back into it, saving another planet. I just wanted a break. But yeah, onto another subject. Something I actually just thought about today. I remember thinking about this during Shadowbringers. And the main reason I'm thinking about it is I'll bring it up right now. So let me bring up the world map real quick. So this is the world map of the first as we know it today. So you can see the flood all around, coalesced into this one position. Only these land masses were spared. Now, if you think these land masses look familiar, you're 100% correct, because these land masses are pretty much identical to the land masses you'd see of Eorzea. So, for example, if let me look up a map of Eorzea, or actually I have a map here, give me a second. So here's a map of Eorzea, and here's a map of the first. Oh god. And let me bring the stream back up. So, as you can see, the land masses look very similar, don't they? Even the formations, islands, inlets, rivers, mountains, even Vilebrand is all the same. So this pretty much confirmed with us early on in Shadowbringers that the land masses of the reflections mirror the land masses of the source, which is our world. But yeah, you can see like the land masses are the same. So you have Ul'dah, and then you have Amarang down here, desert area. The occupying around this area, which is Mordona, is where the Crystal Tower is right now. Interesting coincidence, I think not. Then you have Valbrand over here, where Limsa was. And then you have the Northern Territories over here, which is the Fairy Kingdom in the first, but is Ishgard in our world today. We're missing something over here. We have no Alamigo, but who's to say there's not something over there? Or maybe there was something just a little further north and it's gone now. But my main point I'm trying to make is, like, this is common knowledge. We all knew this. So I found this out a couple of days after Shadowbringers Weekend. I was just looking at the map just going, why does it look like Eorzea? Because it is Eorzea. So this confirmed in my mind that the reflections land masses are all a reflection of the source. What I was thinking to myself today was, are the land masses of the source, Eorzea, everything else, are these how the land masses looked to the ancients when Etheyris was still one? Like, granted, the planet was probably much bigger back then, but it makes me think that the land masses were still the same, or not much different at all, or maybe the planet was pretty much the same size. We can't fully be certain. I'd say it probably was a bit bigger. But it made me think that the land masses all those years ago, when the ancients were still walking around Amarot, everything else, their land masses were the same land masses that we see on the source today. And that had me thinking, okay, let's consider that for a moment. If the land masses were the same, where was everything located on those particular land masses? Like, if we compare our map, where were the main sources or the main sites of the ancient society? So if I look back again at the world map of the first, I really could have just tabbed. We're looking for example, we're looking for Amarot. Now, we know where Amarot, well, we know where the fake one is. Now, we do know that there's ruins underneath the sea, but I think that Emmett Selk built that facsimile of Amarot above the ruins of what was Amarot. So, I have a feeling that that's where Amarot is. Amarot was or is on this island, or near this island, or a sunken portion of this island. So this is where Amarot is on the first. But if you look at the source, that would mean that Amarot was around here. Now, it begs the question, alright, so we know where Amarot is, but we know Amarot, or the ruins of Amarot, and most of the ancient civilization's ruins for that matter, only exist on the first. We've never seen them on the source. We see plenty of ruins from civilizations past, the Allegans, prime example, but we have never seen ruins of the ancient societies on the source. We've only seen them on the first, and they're readily available on the first. The Churning Mist and Azizla with Elpis. Azizla has its own unique story, actually. I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. I actually know exactly where Azizla came from. And it might actually be a contender for the site. The only thing we know about Elpis in the modern day is what Elidibus told us. So he's like, you want to know about Elpis? Okay, what do you want to know? Neria ruin remains. Now, we know ancient ruins were very resilient. Like, the ruins that we saw, well, it's probably easier just to show, isn't it? So let's go down to the Tempest. Now, we notice that there is ruins underneath the Tempest. These things have been lying here for potentially thousands of years. I remember the cutscene where Y'shtola was looking at it. She couldn't get a knife through it. She couldn't even put a pin or a piece of paper through the cracks. That's how good they were. But these ruins are extremely resilient. You'd need a fair amount of force in order to destroy them. So, if ruins like this did exist on the source, it would have made sense that we would have seen them. But it begs the question, back to the question of Elpis. Okay, so let's consider for a moment that their world map was the same as our world map. Where would Elpis be on this map? It's entirely possible that we could encounter Elpis on this world map at some point, like the old Elpis, like the Neria ruin remains Elpis. I mean, granted, yeah, it was floating islands in the sky. I doubt they would have flown there for very long. I'd say they would have fell down at some point. But it makes you wonder, what landmass were they flying above? The fantasy version of Roman concrete. That's a good way of putting it. Are we going to encounter actual ruins of the ancient civilization on the source? Granted, I've already said we haven't seen any yet. They're readily available on the first. We've already noticed that. And we've already seen working facilities on the first, which have been preserved for tens of thousands of years. And they survived the Sundering as well. Granted, they were underwater, but it is what it is. But who's to say they're not underwater on the source as well? Like, think about that for a moment. These ruins, those ruins, and the academia that we went to explore were all entirely underwater. If you look at Etheyris, we haven't really done much underwater exploration. So it's entirely conceivable that pieces of Amarot, or even a large portion of it, are actually under the source. We are the source after all. So ruins of Amarot might be under here, but ruins of other things might be actually swallowed by the sea, like Atlantis in a lot of ways. Like Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, and then there's no trace of it. Is it entirely possible that these ruins are lying around here somewhere? Like, is there a part of the world where these ruins have endured? Or are they underwater like we saw on the first? And I'd like to think that we're able to find them one day. But I'd like to find what remains of Elpis. I mean, I know Elizabeth said Neria ruin remains, but that means that they know where it is. It means they've been there. But I'd like to know. I'd like to be able to see where it was. Like, these islands up here, like, we never really got an explanation for these. These floating islands up here, look. We never really got an explanation about what these are. Fanfest has been a cause of a great amount of drama in the FF14 community. So the main focus of the drama has been, well, I was going to say the supposed, but the actual lack of proper communication from Square Enix on the subject itself, because they promised us a new system. The new system for what they've been doing for Fanfest tickets. It was the right idea, but it was the worst execution they could have done. So, essentially what I mean by that is, like, I said it in my last stream, like, when the last NA Fanfest happened, and I'm talking about the last live one, not the streamed one. When that one happened, the tickets were first come, first served. I can still remember the drama that happened after that. Like, people were fighting to get in the queues. People were getting booted out of the queues. The site was crashing multiple times. By the time it was done, nobody could even get their tickets because the site kept crashing due to all the interest. So that was an oversight on SE's part, underestimating how much people wanted to go to Fanfest. Now, after that Fanfest, now this only happened to NA as well. Like, NA sold out in minutes with the last Fanfest, and the site crashed multiple times. With EU, we didn't sell out right away, and the site never crashed. We all got our tickets. It even went to general sales, and yeah, it was pretty uneventful now, to be honest. But everything has changed. Like, COVID happened, the game has only gotten bigger and bigger. This Fanfest has had so much more interest than I've ever seen in Fanfests up until this point. And the reason they needed a new system is because, as I said, the NA site was crashing all the time, and it was first come, first served, which people didn't feel was fair. Like, not everybody's going to be available on the time, on the spot, to start hitting the refresh button every 5 minutes in order to get a ticket. Which is why they decided they were going to go with the lottery system. Now, when we first heard they were going with the lottery system, a lot of us were happy about it. We're just going like, okay, that's good. They listened to the feedback from North America. EU didn't need it, but we all know the game is bigger now. COVID changed everything as well. People are dying for new events. We did miss the last Fanfest. It was cancelled because of COVID. And they gave us a lottery. But the lottery was handled in one of the worst ways I've ever seen. Because the lottery was literally us applying for it. And then after a few days, they did a random draw, and then a bunch of people got emails with codes. And you could use that code later to purchase your own ticket with no time limit. But once you purchase your ticket with that code, the code would become invalid. But yeah, the lottery was held pretty badly. Now, the main reason that it turned into a disaster is because for some oversight that they didn't see, we saw it coming. These codes weren't tied to their SE accounts, which is what we all assumed it would be. As soon as they said it was going to be a lottery, we were all under the assumption that, okay, it's going to be a lottery, we're going to have a chance to get a code, and that code's going to be tied to our account in some way, and then we use that to buy our tickets when the times come. That would have been fine. The issue, though, however, is the codes aren't tied to our account. So the codes essentially are just a code that you type in. Anybody can do it. You can give it to anybody, and they can go onto the website, type it in, and then buy the tickets. This is where it turned into an absolute fiasco. So take a look at this image, for example. Within minutes, people were on eBay selling these goddamn codes. Like, look at this. Like, here's one for the United States. Here's another one from Germany. And these are low ball prices, FYI. These are low. People were selling them for thousands at one point, and they even sold. I haven't found the images, but I remember seeing them. People sold these codes for hundreds, almost thousands of dollars or euro, and they sold. Now, granted, eBay doesn't like people doing this, so eBay has been good at actually closing these things down, but they're literally just enforcing their rules. Nobody made Square Enix give out codes like this that could be sold. This was literally the worst thing they could have done. They literally gave people the way to make free money. What this meant was only a small percentage of people actually got codes. So Fanfest was already generating a huge amount of hype, and then they brought out the system just going, okay, we're going to do the lottery, apply for the lottery, and you could apply for free, you didn't have to pay for it. So everybody applied, regardless of whether or not they were going to Fanfest or not. So this is what's happening in NA. A load of people applied that didn't even plan to go in the first place. Then the lottery happened, people received their codes, and then quickly they realized these codes aren't tied to your account. You could just sell them if you wanted. So people started to sell them. And then it turned into an absolute fiasco. So most people who wanted tickets legitimately couldn't get them. And people had to start resorting to buying codes off people. But what's worse is the EU lottery happened afterwards. So everybody knew what the score was now. They knew what the codes were. So everybody started making EU accounts and started applying for them. Like, you didn't even have to, like, the other thing that they were supposed to do, and what they said they were going to do ages ago, is they said in order to be eligible for the lottery, you needed to be subscribed for a certain period of time. That didn't pan out. The only rule was you needed to be subscribed. That was it. You didn't need to subscribe for 6 months before this lottery was announced. You didn't need to subscribe 2 months or anything like that. It was just as long as you're subscribed. So people started making EU accounts and subscribing in order to get these tickets. Like, even people from NA. Then the EU lottery comes along, and a very tiny percentage only got codes. And this went over a 2-day period. We're not exactly sure why that happened. They sent out half the emails one day, then sent the other half the second day. I have a feeling that something broke, and then they just started sending codes that way. Not really sure why they did that. They haven't explained themselves. But the fact of the matter is, loads of people applied for the EU lottery solely to get a code, and a lot of them just wanted to troll or just to sell tickets because they knew it was happening. And people started selling codes right away as soon as the EU one launched, and it turned into an absolute fiasco, and people were buying them. Like, here's one for example that has a bid on it. These are not alone. People were bidding and buying these tickets. No exaggeration. They were spending hundreds of euro on these codes. And these codes may not even have been valid. They had no way to know. Not until the point that the site actually allowed you to enter the code would you know it's valid. So it was a big fiasco that way, like. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I have my finger on the pulse of who is attending Fanfest, because I'm the admin of the Fan Events Discord. Like, so most of the people in my Discord are going to Fanfest. So that's hundreds of people. And a tiny percentage of them got tickets. Like, it was heartbreaking. But also, there was a lot of anger directed at SE as well, because how could you do with a system like this? You did a lottery, that was the good thing, but you just held it incorrectly. You didn't hold to your promises of you need to be subscribed for a certain amount of time, you just needed to be subbed in the end, and the codes weren't tied to your account. It was just a disaster. Like, they wanted to avoid scalping, instead they encouraged it. They encouraged people to apply for this lottery to get a code to sell the code on eBay. What the hell were they thinking? But anyway, everybody, go on, enjoy your weekend, and have a good one.